I work with a lot of low-budget filmmakers. And, oh, God, since I met everybody from Star Trek, including Gene Roddenberry and his wife, Magil, and had long talks with just about everybody. I also knew a fellow named Jeff Maynard, who worked with Paramount on Star Trek. And Jeff Maynard had a company called New Eye Studio. He was one of the biggest dealers in Star Trek. And he had a wonderful mailing list. And what happened was I met him by accident because I was selling at a flea market in Connecticut called DiMartino's. And when Jeff Maynard walked in, I didn't know who he was, but I had heard of New Eye.
Now, this is when I met you. When I was a kid, I used to go to DiMartino's indoor flea market with my brother and my parents.
And I remember
you had
that.
Amazing things there.
I remember that. I had a lot. I had a lot of comics there. I had a lot of records. I had collectibles for every single anyone, actors, recording stars, sports figures. I minored in the sports because I sold off a lot of my baseball stuff to another dealer at the flea market. I wasn't as interested in the sports as I was in the recording stars and the actors and actresses. But I dealt with movie posters.
Did you start dealing in vintage toys and memorabilia through DiMartino's or through Star Trek conventions?
At the Star Trek convention, I was mainly into Star Wars, but I brought some other things to sell. I brought some James Bond figures. And what amazed me, the James Bond stuff that I bought to the Star Trek convention sold better than the Star Trek stuff. And the reason for that was because nobody else at the whole Star Trek convention had James Bond stuff. So
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Anyway, what had happened was I had set up at DiMartino's, and I had set up at a couple of flea markets before DiMartino's. The first one I set up with, in the early 1970s, I was having a problem. I was going through a divorce, and I, honest to God, I don't wish a divorce on anybody. What I went through was horrendous. My whole feeling was that my life was falling apart, and I was more concerned for my children than anything else. My wife ended up divorcing me, leaving me with 7 children. I couldn't cope with it. I didn't know what to do. I had to move my 7 children. I was working as a teacher. No way I could be home with the younger ones after they got out of their school. No way that I could do anything. So I had to move my entire 7 children back to New Hyde Park to live with my 2 parents. And my parents took them in, enrolled them in school here in New Hyde Park, and my whole family lived in their house where I live, which I'm living in today. And they were here for 2.5 years. They went to school here, and it took me that long to recover from what had happened in the divorce and bring them back to Connecticut, to the house that I had there. Again,
now, where were you living in Connecticut?
I lived in North Haven. Well, actually, my first home in Connecticut was in East Hampton. And there is an East Hampton in New York, which is very famous. Most people don't know about the one in Connecticut. But my first home was in East Connecticut, was in East Hampton. I taught at East Hampton High School, and I taught art. I had gotten into teaching when I was at Wesleyan University. I figured that was probably, what I wanted to do. But I had been invited, I guess when I started college at Cooper Union, I had written to Disney the summer before, and Disney sent me back a letter inviting me to the Disney company in California, and they would interview me and possibly look at my artwork, which back then was high school art, not college art. And if I had gone out to California and if they had hired me, my life would have been totally different. I told you my big influence was Uncle Scrooge. I loved that character much, but I was young, and when you're young, and you read about a duck that has so many millions and billions of dollars, and he just throws the money all over the place, it just seemed like an incredible story. At any rate, I believe they've made television shows with Scrooge McDuck in it. Okay, the thing is, the television shows never captured anything that was in the comic books. And, I looked at them and I just, it was nothing.
So how did you get into dealing at DiMartino's on a regular basis?
Okay, when I was going through the divorce, this is what happened. I was still teaching in North Haven, Connecticut. Okay, but I had to spend the week in Connecticut to teach. Then I went back on weekends to see my family in New York. And it was terrible going back and forth. It was an hour and a half, 2-hour ride each way. It wasted a lot of time. Sometimes I went in for my kid's birthday, or they had a special event, and I had a day off if it was a holiday, and it was just horrendous. My mother and father raised my children for 2.5 years. Eventually, I brought them back a couple at a time to Connecticut. But when I was in Connecticut, I ended up bumping. I met a friend who was another teacher originally at East Hampton High School. And he was an English teacher. And because I was writing stories, okay, we became friends. And because I was an art teacher, my East Hampton art students would make all the sets for the senior class play and the annual play put on at East Hampton High School. And they would charge admission to the play. And my art class did all the sets. And so Dennis Sullivan, the art teacher, and I became very good friends. I taught at East Hampton for 2 years. During the 2 years that I taught, we became best of friends, and we even started to print a nostalgia magazine together. And what ended up happening is that when I went back to school for teacher orientation on the 3rd year, Dennis wasn't there. And I never saw Dennis Sullivan again. I moved on to teaching at North Haven High School. I bought a home in North Haven. My family was growing up there. And then the divorce. And while I was getting divorced, I had been working on making my first professional motion picture. We worked on a film that was being shot in 35 millimeter Eastman color, negative, type 52-54. And basically, I was the cameraman. I was the director of photography. I was also the co-producer. I was also the co-director. And when the whole film had been shot, I was the editor of the film. This is how I really learned filmmaking in the early 1970s, early to mid 1970s. But working on the film, I got part of the way through it and then the divorce. And this, to me, was a horrendous time in my life because I didn't know which way to run. I couldn't, there was no way by myself I could raise a family with 7 kids. So, I had to make a lot of changes and I had to adapt to a lot of different things. Make a long story short, I was teaching at North Haven High School, and I walked, after school, I had to mail something. I'll never forget this. And I walked into the North Haven post office. I mailed whatever I was mailing, and I walked out. And as I was walking out, I bumped into a man walking in. I didn't see him, he didn't see me, and we hit each other. And it was an accident. But that man walking in was Dennis Sullivan. He was the teacher that, we had started making, writing a magazine together called, Nostalgia World. And
we have issues of that.
Yep. At any
Yeah.
rate, I started the magazine with him, but he told me before he left school, he said, "You can have the magazine. I don't want to do it anymore." And so I took over the magazine. But what happened was when he didn't show up for school, I didn't know what had happened. I didn't see him for about 4 or 5 years. And when we met, I told him I was going through a divorce. I didn't know what to do. He had just gotten married, and he moved to the town next to North Haven. He was in Northford or North Branford, I forget. But what happened is he wanted me to come over to his home, meet his wife, have dinner there. And he came over to my house, and my kids at that point had been moved to New York. So my house was virtually empty. And I told him about how tough it was. I had to go back and forth. I had to help pay for the kids. I had to pay for the house. I had to do this. I had to do that. And he looked at the television set that I had. I had a color TV. It was about 8 feet long. And the color TVs then were in big cabinets. You would open the doors, and it had a 21-inch screen. On each side, on one side was a record player, and on the other side was a radio. And when you slid the doors open, on the bottom underneath the record player, there was a space where you stored all the records standing up. And on the other side, underneath the radio, there was a space where you stored all the records standing up. And Dennis said to me, "What you should do," he said, "if you need money," he said, "do you play those records?" And I said, "No, I haven't played them in years." He said, "Sell them." And I looked at Dennis. I said, "Sell them? Who's going to buy them?" He said, "You go to a flea market." He said, "Before I got married," he said, "I had to sell everything I had because I was moving to Northford." He said, and he told me a story I found incredible to believe. He said to me, the reason I didn't teach anymore at East Hampton High School was because I started my own high school. I looked at him and I said, "You started your own? How did you do that?" He said, "Oh, it was simple. My uncle died and left me $9 million. You're kidding me." He said, "No." He said, "He left me the whole $9 million. Only my uncle was up in Massachusetts." And he said, and he lived in a part of Massachusetts that was depressed. He said, he said, that summer I left East Hampton High School, and he said, I went up to Massachusetts. I rented a room, and he said, and eventually, I would move there permanently. But he said it was a very depressed area. And he said, and all I knew is that I had $9 million, and I had to get rid of it. I said, "You had a what?" "I had to get rid of it." And I said to him, "What do you mean you got rid of it?" He said, "Of course, I wasn't going to keep it." He said, "Who would do that?" He said, "My uncle lived in an area that was depressed. He made so much money there." He said, "So I wanted to give the money back to the area where he lived." He said, "So I bought a building, and I had my own school, and I set it up, and I hired teachers." And he said, and I was going to work with all the students who had dropped out of school, and I was going to teach them and help them get jobs so that they could make something out of their lives. And he said, and when I left Connecticut, he said, I went to a flea market and I sold everything at the flea market. He said, I went to the Milford Flea Market. He said, and what I would do if I were you, he says, take all these records out of the, out of these cabinets, put them in a box. He says, you got an attic? Yes. Go up to the attic, take everything in the attic, fill your car with whatever is in the attic, put the records in the box, and he says, and sell it all at the Milford Flea Market. He says, you have to get there at 5:30 when it's black. And basically, he said, when it's black out, you're going to have to wait on a line to get in. He says, but they open at 6 o'clock. You pay $7 to get in. And he says, and they'll set you up in a space. He says, bring a large blanket so you can put it on the floor. And he says, and put all your merchandise on the blanket. And he says, it helps if you price it ahead of time. What should I sell stuff for? You have to sell the stuff for about half of what you paid for it because it's used. He says, but he says, no matter what you're selling, people are going to try to talk you down in price. He said, so he says, you're going to learn how to sell the first day you set up at the flea market. He says, and try not to go down too low in price. Anyway, I took all the records. I said, how much should I sell them for? Ask $1 each. He says, they originally cost what? $2.98 and $3.98 for the stereos. He says, so ask $1 each. He says, you might be able to get more for some of them, but you don't know which ones. And he says, I don't have the time to show you. But he said, I learned when we were doing the Nostalgia World together. He said, that I did all the articles on musicians and bands and music. And you did the articles on movies. And I did. And Dennis said to me, he says, you'll learn. So
all right, so I'm looking through Nostalgia World issue #1 right now. Has the Beatles on the cover.
Right.
Yep. So this is the guy that you worked on this newsletter with. He was telling you how to start selling stuff.
He told me how to start. He told me about how he sold his records.
Gotcha.
here's what happened.
Because I'm looking through now and I'm realizing, yeah, there are two levels. It's records and music and movies. So you're
Yep.
doing the movie half at this point. Okay, I
Yep.
got you.
Well, what happened is after Dennis left, I had to do both parts.
Uh-huh.
So, but he got me into records. And what happened is, John Shallot is calling again. I'm going to ignore it, though. I'll talk with him after we're done. At any rate, here's the big deal. I went to the, I loaded my station wagon. I had a Chevy Caprice station wagon, 10 passenger, because I had 7 kids. And they were all in New York. So I believe I loaded it all up with, everything I had for sale. I got online at the flea market. It was black outside.
What year was this?
Oh God, what year was that? It would have been in the oh boy, it would have been around the mid 1970s.
Okay.
Maybe it was earlier. I don't remember, but it was after. Was it after or before we printed the? Oh God, I don't remember. Before we printed the first.
Nostalgia World.
Yeah, it would have been. I don't know. It might have been before that because we were having the typeset for it. I think at the time. But at any rate, here's the thing, and this is what amazed me. During that first day at the flea market, I learned the whole business. I couldn't believe it. And here's what happened. I was online. It was black outside. As soon as I got to the booth, I paid $7. They put a tag under the windshield wiper, and there were guys with flashlights. I had to follow them, and there were 4 or 5 of them, and they kept with the flashlighting indicating which way to go. I went up to one aisle. I went into the aisle, and then finally the guy with the flashlight said, "Stop here. This is your booth." Okay, and then another car pulled in ahead of me. Another car pulled in ahead of them. The minute I stopped the car, 5 people came up to me with flashlights. Okay, and every one of them was shining the light into my station wagon, trying to see what I had. One of them said to open up the back door. I opened up the back door, and people started pulling stuff out of my car. How much is this? I didn't know, how much is that? I had no idea. Honest to God, to this day, I have no idea what I sold to the people with flashlights. They all said to me, most of them wanted to pay $1 for everything, and on 1 or 2 things I held out, and I told I have to get $4 or $5 for that. I'll give you 3, and they gave me the 3. All I know is when they went on to the next car, I had about $14 in my hand, and I don't know what I sold. To this day, I have no idea. But at any rate, I closed the station wagon up, and I took the $14 and I went to get breakfast. I went to the snack bar. I bought breakfast. It was getting lighter and lighter, and I'm walking back to the car, and I'm looking at all the stuff that everybody has. They all have it all. Some of them had tables, but most of them put it on a blanket on the floor. And a lot of people had records. And I saw one guy had records and a big sign, 25 cents each for LP albums. Okay? And I thought to myself, wow, I put a sign on my box, $1 each. And I thought to myself, maybe I won't do as well, because I passed another guy, and he had records 50 cents each. So So I walked back, but I had the dollar sign on the box of records. And one of the first people to come up to me goes through the box of records and says to me, "How much are the records?" And there's a big sign with a black magic marker, $1 each.
Yep.
So I said, "They're $1 each." And the guy had pulled out a couple of them. And he says to me, everybody else is selling them for less money. I said, "Yeah, I noticed that." And then I shut up. And he said to me, "You want $1 each?" I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Okay, I'll give you $1 each." So I sold him 3 or 4 records for $1 each. And then during the day, I had a woman came up to me, pulled out one record, and she says to me, "This is $1?" And I said, "Yeah, they're $1 each." She said to me, "I've been looking for this record for over a decade." She said, "I can't believe you have it." And she says, "But let me check the condition." And she slides it out of the sleeve. And she says, "Wow, it's in really nice condition." She said, "But look at this. You've got a little bit of a scratch here." She said, "I don't think it'll affect the play." She said, it's not a big scratch and it's not deep." She said, "But the record is almost perfect."
Do you remember what record that was?
It was a Clyde McFadden record, and it was in stereo. And I didn't know it at the time, but because it was in stereo, it was impossible to find, because all the Clyde McFadden records that sold were in mono. The stereo one was worth much, much more than the mono one. And I didn't know anything about differences like that. But here's what happened. By the time I had lunch, I was able to have lunch, okay? And I went up to the refreshment stand. I bought a hot dog and a soda. And I'm walking back, and I had to get back quickly because there were people there, okay? So what ended up happening, though, I got back and I kept selling. I took in about $140 that day.
That's
Cost
amazing.
me $7. I honest to God, don't even remember how. Oh, I remember I sold a baby scale. It was a pink metal baby scale. We had bought it at J.C. Penney or Sears. It was $29.95. Dennis Sullivan told me, "Sell it half price." So I had $15 on it. A guy came up to me during the flea market, picked up the baby scale, put it under his arm. He said, "I want this." "How much?" I said, "It's $15. "No, no, no, no. Too high. You can do better." Well, I had already sold a lot of things. So I said, "How about $10? "No, no, no. You're way too high. I can't pay that kind of money. No way. You have to do $7. "No, it's way too high." Look, he said, "My wife has the baby. We need the scale. What are you going to do?" And I said to him, $5. That's it. And he looks at me and he says, "I give you $1." I had that happen the whole day. I said, "No, $5. "I give you $2." "No, $5." He said, "Come on, I have no money." He says, "We have the baby." Look, $4. "No, no, no, no." I said, "I'm not going to go any lower." I said, "If you need the scale, take it for $4. "No, no, no, no. You have to do a little better." I just got frustrated. $3, okay? And the guy says, "Now," he says, we're going to make a deal." And I said, fine. He opens his wallet, and he hands me $2. And he starts walking away with the scale. I said, I thought you were going to give me $3. No, he said, he says, I told you, we're close to making a deal. Any rate, I took the $2. I didn't run after him because I had other people in my booth looking at records and things. And at any rate, here's what happened. At the end of the show, everybody is closing up. They're packing all their stuff in their car. I put all my stuff. I wanted to get out of there early. I didn't want to wait on a line, so I packed up my whole wagon, and then I'm walking back to the refreshment stand, and I walk by, and I see a guy who's starting to clean up, and he has a pink baby scale for sale. And I looked at it, and it was exactly like the one I had. Okay, and I looked at the guy, and I didn't remember him. I says, "How much is the baby scale?" And he, "Oh, you don't want to buy that." And he was the one I sold it to, and he was selling it, and he wouldn't tell me the price because he had given me $2, and he was apparently trying to get 10 or 15 for it. So I learned that, number one, people buying, they either buy it for themselves or they buy it to resell it. And that's how the game works. If you're going to resell, you have to buy it at a very low price. That way you can make money. And that's what the guy did. And, he smiled at me.
So you took
he
those
smiled
principles
at me and he said,
at that one day at the flea market, you took those principles and converted to a lifetime in Star Trek, Star Wars, science fiction, comic books, every type of thing that you can imagine.
I'm walking around and I found a couple of Star Trek items. I don't even remember what they were, but they were all like $1, $1.50, whatever, 50 cents. I bought every Star Trek item I could because I collected that. And even though I had doubles of it, I figured, I'll go to another show, I'll sell it again. Because I had such a good day, I was absolutely going to go back to the Milford Flea Market on the next day, on the next Sunday. And at any rate, I go to the refreshment stand. I bought a drink or I don't know, and something else. I don't even remember, some kind of pie. But I'm eating and I'm walking back to my car, and everybody is putting everything in their car because they're all closing up. And one guy looks at me and he says, "Do you sell records?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "You want my box of records?" He had a box of records that said 50 cents each. And he had about 50 records in the box. He says, "Give me $5. Take the box." So I'm looking and I'm thinking, wow, at $5, I'm getting the records for 10 cents each. And so I gave him $5, and I'm carrying the records back to my car. And I put them in the car, closed the door, and then I walked down the aisle again. I'm thinking, wow, maybe I can get more records cheap. And another guy who's still set up, I go through his box of records, and what blew me away, I pulled out of his box a Clyde McFadden record exactly like the one I sold. And I took it out of the sleeve very carefully, and I looked at it, and I couldn't believe it. It was $1, and it was in absolutely perfect condition. No line on it like mine had. And I said to the guy, I said, I did what everybody else does, even though it was marked $1. How much is the record? Oh, it's the end of the show. 50 cents. So I bought the same record I sold for $1 for 50 cents. And I had learned that I had the stereo version of it. And I couldn't understand why the woman who bought my record for $1 didn't buy the one that was in perfect condition. The next time I met Dennis, he told me, he says, well, when you're looking for something, you start at one end of the flea market. As soon as you find what you want, you don't go through the rest of the flea market looking for what you want. And that made sense. She bought my record for $1 because she didn't get up to the guy who had the good record for $1. But at any rate, what blew me away is that I bought the record for 50 cents, and then he says to me, give me another $20 and take all my records. I looked at all the records, and he had about 100 of them. And I thought to myself, that's 100 records, that's 20 cents a record. I said, I'll give you $15. And, no, I got to get 20. I got good records. And I knew he did because I just bought the Clyde McPhatter record from him. So I gave him the $20, and I took the 100 records back to my car. At any rate, when I left the flea market, I had started with one box of 100 records. And when I left the flea market, I had 4 boxes of records. And they had anywhere from 60, 70 to 100 records in each box. And I still had $110 left. That was my first day, and that was the day I learned everything I needed to know about how to buy and sell. Incredible.
Okay. So let's take that. What you learned, you went to the flea market at a one-shot deal trying to clear out your attic of records.
Yep.
And you learned the whole business of buying, selling, and trading at a flea market.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Please continue to follow and interact with us on both Facebook and Twitter.
If you use Apple IIe, Commodore 64, or Tandy computers, find us on your bulletin board system. Your 5-star feedback is always welcome.
Theme music provided by Checkpoint Charley.
Until next time, live long and may the Force be with you.
Nanu Nanu.